The creek was my sanctuary. Tucked behind my 5-acre property, its gentle gurgle greeted me every morning as I sipped coffee on the porch. Pixel, my collie, sprawled at my feet. The land, a patchwork of wildflowers and beehives, was my slice of peace in rural Virginia. I'd bought it 3 years ago, deed in hand, dreaming of a quiet life. Then Karen Davis moved in next door. Karen wasted no time. On a crisp October morning, I spotted her hammering metal fence posts along our shared boundary, right where the creek curved through a legal easement. The posts, stark and silver, blocked my path to the water. I frowned, setting my mug down. The easement was mine, clear as day in the county records. Karen's fence wasn't just ugly, it was illegal. I grabbed my survey and deed, both stamped by the county, and walked over. Karen, in a neon tracksuit, didn't look up from her post-pounding. "Morning," I said, keeping my tone light. "This fence is on my easement. The creek access is mine per the deed." I held out the documents, expecting a quick resolution. Karen stopped, leaned on her hammer, and smirked. "HOA says otherwise," she snapped. "This creek's a community asset. I'm securing it." Her platinum blonde hair glinted in the sun, and her eyes dared me to argue. I blinked. The HOA had no jurisdiction over my deeded easement. Private property trumped their rules. "Karen, the county records are clear. You can't fence this." I offered the papers again. She swatted them away. "You're not special, you know. I'm calling the sheriff." She pulled out her phone, dialing with a flourish. Pixel, sensing tension, pressed against my leg. I sighed. If she wanted to play hardball, fine. The law was on my side. Deputy Rogers arrived within the hour, his cruiser kicking up dust on the gravel drive. A stocky man with a no-nonsense mustache, he stepped out, nodding at me. "What's the issue, folks?" Karen launched into a tirade about community rights and my selfish claim to the creek. I stayed quiet, handing Rogers my documents. He skimmed the survey, then the deed, his brow furrowing as Karen ranted. "Ma'am," he interrupted, turning to Karen, "this easement's deeded to this property. Your fence is on private land. You'll need to remove it." His voice was calm but firm, like a teacher correcting a stubborn student. Karen's face reddened. "The HOA approved this," she sputtered. Rogers shrugged. "HOA doesn't override a deed. Have a pleasant day." He tipped his hat and headed back to his cruiser. I expected Karen to curse or argue, but she just stood there, hammer dangling, eyes locked on me. The silence was worse than an outburst. "This isn't over," she said finally, her voice low. She yanked a post from the ground and stormed off, leaving the rest half-driven like jagged teeth along the boundary. Back at my porch, I watched the creek sparkle under the noon sun. Pixel chased a butterfly, oblivious to the tension. The easement was mine, the sheriff had confirmed it, but Karen's parting words gnawed at me. She wasn't the type to back down. The HOA was her weapon, and I just humiliated her in front of Rogers. My beehives hummed in the distance, their rhythm steady, but my gut churned. I'd won this round, but Karen's glare told me she was already planning the next. That night, I double-checked my locks and set Pixel's water bowl by the door. The creek's soft murmur drifted through the open window, a reminder of what I stood to lose. Karen's fence posts still littered the boundary, a challenge I couldn't ignore. I pulled out my laptop and started researching HOA bylaws, sensing the fight was only beginning. Somewhere across the property line, Karen was plotting, and I'd need more than a deed to stop her. 2 weeks after the sheriff's visit, I came home to a war zone. My wire fence was slashed in 3 places, its ends twisted like broken bones. Deep tire tracks scarred the mud near the creek, and one of my beehives lay in ruins, frames splintered, honey oozing into the grass. Worst of all, Pixel, my collie, limped toward me whimpering. A nail board half buried by the fence line had pierced his paw. The vet cleaned it, prescribed antibiotics, and charged $200. My blood boiled. This wasn't a dispute anymore, it was sabotage. I was done playing defense. I ordered 4 motion sensor cameras, rigged to ping my phone every 10 seconds until I silenced them. Next, I called Nora Beltran, a licensed surveyor with a reputation for precision and grit. She arrived the next day, marking my property with fluorescent orange stakes and laminating "no tampering" signs that cited criminal penalties. The stakes glowed at dusk, a neon line in the sand. That night at 1:13 a.m., my phone erupted with alerts. The camera feed showed two figures in hoodies yanking Nora's stakes and tossing them into the creek. One, tall and lanky, wielded bolt cutters. Moonlight caught his face, Chandler, a local troublemaker, as Deputy Rogers later confirmed. The second, shorter, with platinum blonde hair spilling from her hood, was Karen. Her sneer was unmistakable. I called Rogers at dawn, sending him the footage. He didn't hesitate. By 6 a.m., he had a warrant for criminal mischief and trespassing. His body cam captured the takedown at Chandler's trailer. Chandler, in sagging pajama pants, swore he'd been asleep. Rogers held up a still from my camera, Chandler mid-grimace, bolt cutters glinting. "Wanna try that again?" Rogers asked. Chandler shut up. At Karen's, it was worse. Rogers found my stolen stakes stacked in her garage next to Nora's laminated signs and a can of spray paint, neon green, the same shade defacing my no trespassing signs. Karen claimed Chandler stored tools there without her knowledge, but her voice shook and Rogers wasn't buying it. He cuffed them both. Karen posted bond by noon, her lawyer already spinning excuses. Chandler wasn't so lucky. On probation for a 2021 check kiting scheme, he faced a no-bond hold pending a revocation hearing. As deputies hauled him to county jail, I stood by the creek, watching the water ripple. The cameras still hummed, their red lights winking in the dawn. Pixel, bandaged but wagging, nudged my hand. The evidence was ironclad, but Karen's quick release gnawed at me. She'd be back plotting, and Chandler's arrest only raised the stakes. Nora's stakes were gone, but her survey map was safe in my desk. I emailed the footage to my lawyer, Elliot, knowing this was just the opening salvo. Karen's garage held proof of her guilt, but her HOA connections and Chandler's desperation made them a dangerous pair. The creek glittered, but my peace felt fragile, like honey spilling from a broken hive. With Chandler locked up, my lawyer, Elliot, turned the screws. We subpoenaed the HOA's financial records to trace the $3,500 cashier's check Chandler had signed for Karen's illegal gate. The check, drawn from the HOA's reserve account, was a red flag. Elliot suspected it wasn't an isolated move, and he was right. As we dug deeper, we uncovered a web of fraud that made my creek dispute look like a footnote. Chandler, the HOA's bookkeeper, had been siphoning funds for years. Records showed checks totaling $46,900 for grounds improvements that never happened, phantom landscaping, non-existent repairs, and a fabricated community fountain no one had ever seen. The gate was just the latest in his schemes, a shiny distraction to mask the theft. Worse, several payments labeled as consulting fees had landed in Karen's personal bank account, totaling $12,000 over 2 years. The HOA's reserve fund, meant for roads and shared spaces, was gutted. The HOA board was blindsided. At an emergency meeting, pale-faced members voted unanimously to press charges against Chandler. They hired their own lawyer and handed the case to Detective Miriam Page, a sharp-eyed investigator from the county's white-collar crime unit. Page didn't waste time. She seized Chandler's home computer and unearthed a digital paper trail, forged receipts, fake meeting minutes, and a Word template for neon green approval stamps used on fraudulent invoices. One email from Karen to Chandler, dated 3 months prior, read, "Make sure the gate payment clears before the audit." It was a smoking gun. Karen lawyered up fast. James Hall, a defense attorney with a $600 per hour rate and a reputation for dodging questions, filed motions to suppress the garage evidence. He argued Karen was a victim of Chandler's schemes, unaware of the stolen stakes or spray paint in her own home. The claim was laughable, but Hall's confidence unnerved me. Karen, out on bond, was spotted at the HOA clubhouse, whispering with board members. Her influence lingered like a bad smell. Chandler, meanwhile, was sweating. His 2021 check kiting conviction already had him on thin ice, and the new charges, felony theft, conspiracy, and probation violation, could bury him. Facing years behind bars, he cracked. In a meeting with the DA, Chandler agreed to testify against Karen in exchange for a reduced sentence. He promised to detail her role in the land grab and the HOA fraud down to the last forged signature. The DA, smelling a bigger conviction, took the deal. The HOA's betrayal hit hard. I paid dues for years, trusting them to maintain our community, not rob it blind. Now my neighbors whispered about budget shortfalls and delayed road repairs, all because of Chandler's greed and Karen's scheming. Elliot warned me the legal fight was far from over. Karen's lawyer was a shark, and her HOA allies might try to sway the board. But Paige's evidence was mounting: bank records, emails, even Chandler's own notes outlining the creek annexation plan. As I walked the property, Pixel trotting beside me, the creek's murmur felt distant. My beehives hummed, but the shattered one still lay in pieces, a reminder of the cost. The cameras blinked steadily, their footage now with the DA. Karen's garage had exposed her, and Chandler's testimony would nail the coffin shut, but victory felt hollow. The HOA's collapse and Karen's lingering influence loomed large. I clutched Nora's survey map, its fluorescent stakes a fading memory. The fight for my land was now a fight for justice, and I wasn't backing down. The legal battle dragged on for months, but Chandler's desperation broke the stalemate. Facing a probation violation from his 2021 check-kiting conviction, he pled guilty, triggering an automatic 18-month sentence. New felony charges, conspiracy, theft, and criminal mischief loomed larger. The DA offered a deal: 4 years, with parole eligibility in 2 if he testified against Karen. Chandler, staring down a longer stretch, took it. In a packed courtroom, he spilled everything. Under oath, Chandler detailed Karen's plan to annex my creek by manipulating the HOA. She promised him a slice of my land once the easement was hers, using his bookkeeping access to funnel HOA funds for her gate and other projects. His voice shook as he described their late-night stake-pulling mission, caught on my cameras. The prosecutor played the ring footage. 12:47 a.m., Karen and Chandler loading rebar into her SUV, her blonde hair glinting under a streetlight. The jury leaned forward, eyes fixed on the screen. My camera evidence was damning. Another clip showed Chandler, bolt cutters in hand, snapping my fence while Karen tossed Nora's stakes into the creek. The timestamps matched Chandler's testimony to the minute. Karen's lawyer, James Hall, tried to spin it. Chandler acted alone. Karen was misled, but the jury wasn't buying it. After 3 hours of deliberation, they delivered guilty verdicts on all counts: felony conspiracy, theft, criminal mischief, and misdemeanor trespass. At sentencing, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Chandler, already in prison orange, got his 4-year deal, parole in 2. Karen, in a tailored blazer that screamed Hall's $600 an hour fee, stood rigid as the judge spoke. 18 months in prison, $32,000 restitution to me for damages, $46,900 to the HOA for stolen funds, and a 5-year no-contact order post-release. Her bond was revoked. Deputies cuffed her on the spot. As they led her away, I caught her eye. Her glare burned, but I gave a small, polite wave, not out of malice, but to mark the end. The gavel fell, and the room exhaled. Driving home, the weight of the fight settled. The creek glimmered in the twilight, free again. Pixel, his paw healed, bounded across the grass, chasing a moth. My beehives hummed, though the shattered one still needed repair. The cameras, now silent, had done their job. Karen's scheme had unraveled, her HOA allies silenced by the board's new leadership. Chandler's testimony and my footage had turned her lies to ash. I started rebuilding. The $32,000 restitution wouldn't come quickly. Karen's prison wages were a trickle, but it was a start. I ordered new beehive frames and cleared the ground where her gate once stood. The easement felt mine again, not just on paper but in spirit. I sketched plans for a greenhouse, imagining tomatoes and basil thriving where Karen's posts had scarred the earth. Pixel's tail wagged as I raked the soil, his energy a reminder of what I'd fought for. The victory wasn't just legal, it was personal. Sleepless nights, Pixel's limp, the sting of honey lost to vandalism, they'd shaped me, hardened my resolve. The creek's murmur, once drowned by worry, now soothed. I wasn't naive. Karen's no-contact order didn't erase her spite, and the HOA's wounds would linger. But for now, the land was mine and peace was within reach. As the sun dipped, I sat on the porch, Pixel at my feet, and let the quiet sink in. The fight was over, and I'd won more than a verdict. I'd won my home. The dust of the trial settled, and the HOA began to heal. A new board, purged of Karen's allies, took charge. Their first act was a formal apology, delivered in a crisp envelope with a $4,500 check from Chandler's frozen account to repair my shattered beehive. The gesture wasn't just financial, it was a promise to rebuild trust. I deposited the check, feeling a knot loosen in my chest. The creek, sparkling under a spring sun, seemed to nod in approval. I turned my focus to the land. Karen's illegal gate was gone, its posts uprooted like bad memories. In its place, I built a greenhouse on the easement, right where her fence had scarred the earth. The frame went up in a weekend, glass panels catching the light like a beacon. Inside, I planted tomato starts and basil, their sharp scents mingling with fresh soil. Each seedling felt like a middle finger to Karen's schemes. The greenhouse wasn't just a structure, it was a declaration. This land was mine, and I'd make it thrive. Pixel, fully healed, raced across the property, his paw no longer tender. The vet had cleared him, and his tail wagged like a metronome as he chased butterflies near the creek. The bees, too, were rebounding. I rebuilt the damaged hive, the new frames gleaming with wax. The hum of their wings filled the air, a steady pulse of life. Mornings became rituals again. Coffee on the porch, Pixel sprawled beside me, the creek's murmur a quiet companion. The cameras, once my lifeline, now gathered dust in a drawer. Peace, fragile but real, was taking root. The neighborhood shifted around me. Karen's house sat empty, her for sale sign a grim trophy. New families moved in down the road, their kids biking past with waves. The HOA's new board held open meetings, posting budgets online to avoid another Chandler. I attended one, sipping bad coffee as they debated road repairs. No one mentioned the creek or Karen, but her absence hung like a ghost. The board's transparency felt like a fresh breeze, clearing the stench of her influence. I started to dream bigger. The $4,500 covered the hive, but I eyed a small orchard, maybe apples or pears, along the creek's edge. Elliot, my lawyer, suggested a conservation easement to protect the land forever, a legal shield against future Karens. I mulled it over, sketching tree placements late at night. The greenhouse glowed under moonlight, its glass a promise of growth. Pixel slept by the fire, his snores a reminder of what I'd fought for, this life, this quiet. But shadows lingered. One April morning, a letter arrived, its return address unfamiliar. Elaine Castor, claiming to be Karen's cousin, wrote in tight script asserting a private right-of-way across my easement. The claim was flimsy, citing a deed I'd never seen, but it stirred unease. Was this Karen's last jab, orchestrated from her prison cell? I set the letter on my desk next to Nora's survey map. Elliot would handle it, I told myself, but my gut churned. The creek glittered outside, serene yet vulnerable. I walked the property that evening, Pixel trotting beside me. The greenhouse stood proud, tomatoes already budding. The bees buzzed and the air smelled of spring. Karen's conviction had closed one chapter, but Elaine's letter hinted at another. I wasn't naive, peace was hard-won and threats could resurface. But as I stood by the creek, its water cold against my fingers, I felt ready. The land was mine, the fight had forged me, and whatever came next, I'd face it with stakes as bright as Nora's. A year after Karen's conviction, the creek still flowed and my greenhouse thrived, its tomatoes heavy on the vine. I thought the worst was behind me. Then on a quiet May morning, a letter arrived from Elaine Castor, claiming to be Karen's cousin and heir. In sharp, formal prose, she demanded a private right-of-way across my easement, citing a deed granting her access to the creek. The document, attached as a blurry photocopy, smelled of desperation, a clumsy forgery with mismatched fonts and a notary stamp that looked sketched by hand. My stomach tightened. Was this Karen pulling strings from her prison cell? I called Elliot, my lawyer, and faxed him the letter. He laughed, a rare sound from his usually stoic demeanor. "This is amateur hour," he said. "Give me a day." He cross-referenced Elaine's deed against county records, finding no trace of it. Nora Beltran, my surveyor, sent her original map, its fluorescent stakes and precise coordinates a legal fortress. Elliot drafted a cease and desist letter, warning Elaine of fraud charges if she pursued the claim. By week's end, Elaine withdrew her demand, her silence louder than any apology. The creek sparkled untouched, but the letter left a chill. Karen's shadow lingered, even behind bars. Restitution checks began trickling in, small but symbolic. Karen's prison wages, garnished at $58 a month, arrived quarterly, $174 total. Barely a dent in the $32,000 she owed me or the $46,900 owed to the HOA. Still, each deposit felt like a tiny victory, proof she couldn't escape accountability. I set the money aside for new beehive frames, letting her labor rebuild what she'd destroyed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen, once the HOA's tyrant, now toiled for pennies, her schemes reduced to a bureaucratic trickle. Then came a surprise from Chandler. A letter postmarked from the state penitentiary landed in my mailbox. Inside, in neat handwriting, he apologized. He'd earned a paralegal certificate, he wrote, and spent his days studying law, haunted by the damage he'd caused. I was greedy and Karen used that, he admitted. "I'm sorry for your hives, your dog, your peace. Enclosed was a hand-drawn map suggesting apple and pear trees along my creek, a quiet gesture, impractical but earnest. I sat on the porch, Pixel dozing nearby, and read it twice. Chandler's regret felt real, but trust was hard-won. I wrote back, keeping it short. "Thanks for the apology," I said. "The sunflowers are taller than ever." I didn't mention the orchard but kept his map, tucking it into a drawer. Forgiveness wasn't there yet, but the gesture softened something in me. The creek murmured outside, and my greenhouse glowed under the evening sun. The bees hummed, their rhythm steady. Corinne's forged deed had failed, her restitution was a slow drip, and Chandler's letter was a faint olive branch. The land felt secure, but I wasn't naive. Peace required vigilance. I walked the property that night, Pixel trotting beside me. The greenhouse smelled of basil, and the creek's water was cool against my fingers. Elaine's letter had been a scare, but Elliot's quick work proved my defenses were strong. Corinne's influence was fatting, her prison wages a reminder of justice. Chandler's map, however small, hinted at redemption, a cycle turning full circle. I looked at the stars, brighter now without Corinne's shadow. The fight had scarred me, but it had also built me, sturdier like the stakes Nora once planted. Whatever came next, I'd face it with roots as deep as my sunflowers, ready for whatever the creek carried my way. Corinne's house, once a fortress of HOA tyranny, sold quietly in the spring. Sprout Tomorrow, an organic farming nonprofit, bought the property with a bold plan: transform her manicured lawn into a community garden for native pollinators and local produce. The irony was sharp. Corinne's land, where she'd schemed to steal my creek, would now bloom for the neighbors she'd bullied. When Sprout Tomorrow invited me to consult on pollinator-friendly plants, I didn't hesitate. Her defeat was already sweet. Helping her land become a public good felt like poetry. The first volunteer day was a humid June morning, the air thick with the promise of rain. I arrived with my brush cutter, its blade gleaming, ready to carve through Corinne's overgrown hedges. Deputy Rogers showed up, trading his uniform for a flannel shirt, his mustache twitching with a rare smile. New HOA members, free of Corinne's old cronies, hauled wheelbarrows and swapped stories. Kids from the neighborhood darted between rows, planting marigolds under the sun. The scene was chaotic, joyful, and utterly unlike the tense HOA meetings of the past. We tore into Corinne's lawn, ripping up sod to make way for raised beds. Rogers manned a tiller, carving furrows for tomato vines and zucchini. I guided volunteers on native plants, milkweed for monarchs, coneflowers for bees, each choice a nod to my own hives. My brush cutter roared, leveling the last of Corinne's ornamental shrubs. By noon the yard was unrecognizable, bare earth, neat rows, and the first green sprigs of hope. The creek, just beyond my property line, seemed to hum in approval. Lending my cutter wasn't just practical, it was cathartic. Every slice through Corinne's landscaping erased a piece of her legacy. She used HOA rules to control, to divide. Now her land united us. A new board member, Sarah, thanked me for the tool, her hands dusted with soil. "This feels right," she said, gesturing to the garden. I nodded, wiping sweat from my brow. It wasn't just right, it was redemptive. As the day wound down, we sat on folding chairs, sharing water and stories. Rogers recounted Corinne's arrest, chuckling at her garage full of stolen steaks. Sarah admitted the old HOA's failures, vowing transparency. I stayed quiet, watching bees, maybe mine, dance over the new milkweed. The garden was more than plants. It was a middle finger to Corinne's greed, a living rebuke to her schemes. Her lawn, once a status symbol, now fed the community she'd tried to dominate. The irony hit me hard. Corinne had fought to annex my creek, to bend the HOA to her will. Now her land was a gift to the neighbors she'd alienated, her control upended by tomato vines and laughter. I weeded a row, my hands in the dirt, and felt the fight's weight lift. The greenhouse on my easement, the humming hives, Pixel's wagging tail, they were victories, but this garden was something more. It was collective, a shared healing. Driving home, I passed the creek, its surface catching the dusk. Sprout Tomorrow's sign stood proud on Corinne's former lot, community garden all welcome. I smiled, thinking of her in her cell, her wages trickling to me at $58 a month. The garden was my final victory, not just over her but over the chaos she'd sown. I parked, let Pixel out, and stood by the greenhouse, its glass warm from the day. The bees buzzed, the creek sang, and the new garden bloomed. Corinne's shadow was gone, replaced by roots that would outlast us all. October's golden light bathed the community garden on Corinne's former property, now alive with Sprout Tomorrow's harvest. The nonprofit hosted a dinner to celebrate, tables groaning under dishes grown in the soil we'd reclaimed, roasted butternut squash, garlic honey carrots, and heirloom tomato bruschetta, each bite a testament to the land's rebirth. Neighbors laughed, kids ran through the rows, and bees, maybe mine, hummed over late-blooming coneflowers. I sat with a plate, Pixel curled at my feet, the creek's soft murmur blending with the chatter. Sarah, the new HOA board member, raised a glass, her voice cutting through the dusk. "To the garden and to you," she said, nodding at me, "for fighting for what's right." The crowd clapped, but I shrugged, heat creeping up my neck. "It was all of us," I said, gesturing to Rogers, the volunteers, the kids planting seeds. "The real victory wasn't mine alone. It was this moment, hostility turned to nourishment, Karen's control undone by community." The applause faded, but the warmth lingered, like the squash on my plate. I'd been busy since the garden took root. Using Karen's old fence wood, I built a barn on my property, fully permitted, its beams sanded smooth but left raw to show their scars. The county inspector signed off with a grin, nodding its sturdiness. Each nail I drove felt like a full stop to the fight, my easement secure, my land whole. The barn stood where I'd once watched for vandals, its shadow falling across the greenhouse. Inside, I stored tools, beehive frames, and a few apple saplings inspired by Chandler's prison sketch. It wasn't just a building, it was a monument to what I'd won. Pixel, now spry as ever, raced through the fields daily, his paw long-heeled. Mornings found us by the creek, me with coffee, him chasing ripples. The bees thrived, their hives humming with new honey, the shattered one rebuilt stronger. Restitution checks from Karen's $58 a month prison wages trickled in, small but steady, funding a new hive box. The cameras, once my lifeline, sat boxed in the barn, their work done. The creek's song, once drowned by worry, was my alarm clock again. As I ate bruschetta, the tomatoes bursting with summer, I reflected on the arc. Karen's land grab, her vandalism, her HOA schemes, they'd been a storm tearing at my peace. But storms pass and they'd left fertile ground. The garden feeding neighbors was proof, her hostility had birthed a